about our flood affected areas, and because it's been a rough time in the last month. Not only are people, now there's a new flu strain around that people are coming down with. Of course, there's still that COVID word, and just plenty of work and trying to get back into business for most people. But then there were the floods. So some of our areas and some of the photographs that I was sent from agents up in the Lismore, Ballina area are just horrifying. And the number of, I know staff from one agency who actually lost their properties. So it wasn't just, oh yeah, it's somebody, somebody's client or somebody's friend. It was some of our clients, it was some of our friends that actually lost their properties, and some agents up in these areas who've, no different from anybody else in those local areas, they've been doing it really tough. Now, many tenants have been returning to flood damaged properties, and they're facing decisions about finding a new rental or temporary housing. And we've all heard on the news broadcasts about what's happened up around the holiday areas of Ballina and Byron and a bit further north, that what was the holiday accommodation, that when people were who were flood affected were in those, were then put out when the school holidays came and Easter and the long weekends. So there's been some really tough times up there. So if you're a tenant or a landlord that's affected by all of this, New South Wales Fair Trading has put in place protections that can assist. And it's really, as an agent, when you're getting those questions, it's the best place to go. Go straight to the Fair Trading website and start reading from there about what you need to do. So if a property's been affected by a natural disaster, such as a flood, obviously bushfire, storms, tenants and landlords have certain rights and responsibilities. So if the property is destroyed or becomes totally or partially uninhabitable, so there's your word there, that's uninhabitable, the landlord and the tenant can actually mutually agree to end the tenancy. So it's over. But if no agreement comes about, so either side say, no, I don't want to end the tenancy, so that can be either side, the tenant or the landlord can give a written termination notice to end that tenancy immediately or on a specified date, because the property is unlivable. So obviously if either party believe that the termination notice hasn't been issued in line with the legislation, an application can be made to NCAT, because obviously there are people who will use it to, in circumstances where the property is habitable, to try and get out of a lease, be that from either the tenant or the landlord perspective. So alternatively, the tenant can move out temporarily and return once the repairs are complete. The landlord's not what's important to remember is that the landlord is not obliged to find or pay for the tenant's temporary accommodation. But a tenant can ask for a rent reduction, obviously, for the time they were unable to live in a property. So again, that's a negotiation point. If it doesn't work, then there's NCAT as your backup there. So if a tenant leaves the property and they're unable to take their goods with them, for those who have some goods left, landlords cannot dispose of those belongings before notifying the tenant. So, the tenant needs to tell the agent where they've gone, or the landlord. The Uncollected Goods Act, which now deals with uncollected goods, gives the person in the possession of those goods, so that's usually the agent who's looking after that on behalf of the landlord, the right to dispose of them after a certain amount of time, and only when you've contacted the tenant. If you're experiencing a problem, or in there again, it's an NCAT issue. So if the property is only partially uninhabitable, the tenant can choose to stay in the property whilst the repairs are undertaken. Okay, tenants obviously should only consider doing this, and landlords should only consider doing this if it's livable for the other part, if the repairs are actually relatively minor, and there's no safety risks involved here. Obviously, the tenant again can ask for a partial rent reduction during that period because they're not using part of the property. Other options include the landlord and the tenant can decide to formally end the agreement, and they can re-sign a new agreement after the repairs are complete. So they can end it, start it, because it may have been a really good relationship, but there's this hiatus in the middle where the property needs to be fixed. So, landlords or agents can only enter the property when with the tenant's consent, if they're, giving the appropriate notice, obviously, or if certain circumstances relating to natural disasters apply. So that's an emergency situation, floods, complete urgent repairs, the landlord or their agent has serious concerns about the health or the safety or the well-being of the tenant, or following an order from NCAT, or they believe the property to have been abandoned. So, it's really important that an agent works within all of these parameters. So it's not taking away from what the Residential Tenancy Act constantly tells us how to behave as an agent on behalf of your client who is the landlord. But obviously these are unusual situations, and get onto the Fair Trading website so you can see where you can get some help. And there's lots of other, there's government grants in there, and all of that, you can click on those from the Fair Trading website to find out what your tenant or your landlord might be eligible for. So guys, I know it's a couple of weeks now since the floods, but as everything's sort of just starting to, I guess the dust or the water is settling, and it's time now to make something happen there. So yeah, good information out there. Make sure you follow it if that's something that affects you. And of course, it's always good to remember that it's there because there are other natural disasters. I mean, a couple of Christmases ago, we got hit with all of the fires, and there are certainly storms. There are a whole range of other things. And it wasn't just the North Coast. There were other areas of Sydney that got quite badly hit in all of those storms as well. So it does affect quite a few areas.